There's a strange allure to abandoned places, isn't there? The peeling paint, the dust-covered floors, the silence that hangs heavy in the air. It's like stepping into a forgotten world, a place where time has stopped. But sometimes, these forgotten places aren't as empty as they seem. Sometimes the silence is broken, and the stillness is disturbed by something that has no business being there. And today, we're going to be looking at some of the most chilling encounters ever recorded inside abandoned buildings. These aren't just stories or urban legends, these are real moments, captured by people who ventured into the dark and found something waiting for them. The stories you're about to hear are pulled from the recordings of urban explorers, ghost hunters, and curious individuals who thought they were just documenting decay and ruin. They set up their cameras, expecting to capture nothing more than eerie architecture and the play of shadows. What they got instead was something far more terrifying. From shadowy figures that defy explanation to disembodied voices that echo through empty halls, these encounters will make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And the most unsettling part, every single incident was caught on camera. So before we get into it, I'd invite you to offer the like button a tour of an abandoned building. But don't tell it about the strange, dark, and mysterious things that have been known to happen inside. Also, please subscribe if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format. Now, prepare yourself. We're about to step through the broken doors and shattered windows into a world where the past refuses to stay buried. These are 6 of the most disturbing abandoned building encounters ever caught on camera. Our first story takes us to a place that many people find inherently unsettling: an old derelict hospital. A team of 3 urban explorers, we'll call them Mark, Sarah, and Kevin, decided to investigate the St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, a massive complex that had been closed for over 2 decades. They had heard all the local legends, of course, stories of former patients who never truly left, of strange noises and apparitions seen wandering the wards at night. Armed with high-definition cameras and flashlights, they were determined to either debunk the myths or capture something extraordinary. They made their way inside through a broken window on the ground floor, the crunch of shattered glass under their boots echoing in the cavernous entryway. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, a scent unique to places left to rot. For the first hour, their exploration was uneventful. They documented the decaying operating theaters, the rows of empty beds in the wards, and the patient files scattered across the floor of the records room. The atmosphere was undeniably creepy, but nothing out of the ordinary for a place like this. It was just a building, slowly being reclaimed by nature. The team decided to head up to the pediatric wing on the 3rd floor, a section of the hospital notorious for paranormal claims. As they ascended the main staircase, the temperature seemed to drop significantly. Mark, who was filming, even commented on it, his breath misting in the beam of his flashlight. They entered a long, dark corridor lined with what used to be children's rooms. Faded cartoon characters were still visible on the walls, a cheerful and yet deeply sad reminder of the lives that were once lived, and, in some cases, lost here. They moved slowly down the hall, their flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. Sarah was in the lead, followed by Kevin, with Mark bringing up the rear, camera rolling. They were speaking in hushed tones, pointing out a rusted tricycle here, a fallen mobile there. It was as they reached the end of the hallway that it happened. Mark panned his camera back down the corridor, just to get a final shot of the eerie scene. But as the camera moved, it captured something that wasn't there a moment before. Standing in the doorway of one of the rooms they had just passed was a tall, slender figure. It was completely black, a silhouette that seemed to absorb the light from their flashlights. It had no discernible features, no face, no clothes, just a vaguely human shape, standing perfectly still. A collective gasp is heard on the recording. Kevin, seeing it in the camera's display screen over Mark's shoulder, whispered a frantic, "What is that?" The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching them from the darkness of the doorway. Mark, his hands trembling slightly, tried to zoom in. As he did, the figure seemed to waver. It distorted for a second, like a heat haze on a summer road, and then it simply stepped back into the pitch-black room, vanishing completely. There was no sound, no footstep, nothing. It was just gone. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the explorers' ragged breathing. They hadn't just seen a trick of the light, or a shadow playing games with their minds. Without another word, they turned and fled. The footage shows a shaky, panicked retreat, back down the stairs and out of the hospital, the camera bouncing wildly. They didn't stop running until they were back in their car, doors locked, miles away from St. Jude's. When they later reviewed the footage, the figure was undeniably there, a silent, dark sentinel in the abandoned children's ward. They had gone in as skeptics, but they left with proof that some places and perhaps some souls are never truly abandoned. Next, we journey to the infamous Pennhurst State School and Hospital in Pennsylvania. For those who don't know, Pennhurst has a dark and tragic history of patient abuse and neglect, and it's considered one of the most haunted locations in the United States. In 2011, a group of paranormal investigators got permission for an overnight lockdown in the Mayflower Building, one of the most active structures on the property. Their goal was to communicate with whatever spirits might remain, using a full spectrum of ghost hunting equipment, including digital voice recorders. The team set up their base of operations in a large, barren room that once served as a day room for patients. The night started quietly. For hours, they conducted EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, sessions in various parts of the building, asking questions into the darkness and hoping for a response. They would ask a question, wait in complete silence for a minute, and then move on. They heard the usual creaks and groans of an old building settling, but nothing that could be considered paranormal. It seemed like it was going to be a long, quiet night. Around 2 a.m., the atmosphere began to shift. A palpable sense of heaviness descended upon the team. One of the investigators, a woman named Chloe, reported feeling like she was being watched, a common claim in places like this, but her unease was visibly growing. They decided to move to the second floor, to a long hallway that was rumored to be a hotspot for auditory phenomena. They set up their recorders in the middle of the hall and once again began asking questions. "Is there anyone here with us? Can you tell us your name?" The only reply was the wind whistling through a broken window pane. After about 20 minutes of silence, they were about to pack up and move to another spot when they heard it. It started faintly, a low moaning sound that seemed to come from the far end of the hall. At first, they thought it might be the wind, but the sound began to grow in intensity and pitch. It wasn't the wind, it was a voice, a human voice, filled with an agony so profound it was sickening to hear. The moan escalated into a full-blown, blood-curdling scream. It was a sound of pure terror and pain, echoing off the tiled walls of the asylum corridor. The investigators stood frozen, their flashlights all pointing towards the source of the noise. The scream was so loud, so raw, it felt like it was happening right next to them, yet there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. On the audio recording, you can hear one of the investigators whisper, "Oh my God," his voice trembling with fear. The scream continued for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 to 15 seconds before it abruptly cut off, plunging the hallway back into a dead, chilling silence. The team was shaken to their core. This wasn't a faint, disembodied whisper that could be debated or explained away. It was a visceral, powerful scream that had no logical source. They checked their equipment, their surroundings, everything. There was no one else in the building, no speakers, no way to fake what they had all just experienced together. The sound they captured was a raw audio file of pure, unadulterated suffering, a chilling echo from Pennhurst's brutal past. They didn't stay much longer after that. The energy in the building felt hostile, and the memory of that scream was branded into their minds. When they reviewed their recordings, the sound was even clearer, even more horrifying than they remembered. It was the sound of someone who had been through unimaginable torment. It serves as a terrifying reminder that while the building may be abandoned, the pain and sorrow that saturated its walls might just linger forever. Our third story brings us to a deserted nursing home in rural Ohio, a place that closed its doors in the late 1990s after falling into disrepair. Two friends, Alex and Ben, who ran a small YouTube channel dedicated to exploring abandoned places, decided to film their visit. The building was a single-story structure, but it was sprawling, with long corridors and dozens of rooms still filled with decaying furniture, including beds, walkers, and, most notably, wheelchairs. There was an eerie sense of stillness, as if the residents had just vanished one day. For the first part of their exploration, everything was standard fare. They walked through the silent rooms, commenting on the personal items left behind, a pair of glasses on a nightstand, a faded photograph on a wall. The place had a melancholy air, but not a threatening one. They eventually made their way to a large common area where residents would have gathered for activities. In the center of this room sat a single old-fashioned wheelchair, facing away from them towards a large, grimy window. Alex, who was holding the camera, decided it would make for a great atmospheric shot. He set the camera up on a tripod facing the wheelchair and the window, making sure the entire room was in frame. He and Ben then walked over to the other side of the room to explore some of the smaller adjoining offices, leaving the camera rolling. They wanted to capture a static shot of the room's ambiance, hoping to maybe catch some dust motes floating in the light, or perhaps something more. They were talking quietly off camera, their voices muffled as they rummaged through some old files. About 5 minutes into the recording, while Alex and Ben are still audible in the background, something happens that defies all explanation. The wheelchair, which had been perfectly still, begins to move. It's not a sudden jerk or a violent shake. It starts to turn, slowly and deliberately, as if an invisible person is pushing it. It rotates a full 90 degrees to its left, so it's now facing the camera directly. The movement is smooth and completely silent. The old rusted wheels don't even squeak. The chair then sits motionless for about 30 seconds, facing the camera as if it's observing the room. Then, just as slowly and silently as before, it begins to roll forward. It moves a few feet towards the camera before coming to a complete stop in the middle of the empty floor. All of this happens in complete silence, save for the continued muffled voices of the two explorers in the other room, completely oblivious to what is unfolding just a few yards away from them. It wasn't until Alex and Ben returned to the common area to retrieve the camera that they noticed something was wrong. "Hey," Alex says on the recording, his voice suddenly sharp. "Didn't we leave this wheelchair facing the window?" Ben agrees, sounding confused. They approach the camera, and you can hear Alex's stunned silence as he presumably rewinds the footage on the camera's small screen. A moment later he just says, "Dude, you have to see this. The footage is undeniable. There are no strings, no drafts from the sealed windows, no sloping floor." The wheelchair moves on its own accord with a purpose that is deeply unsettling. They had captured clear, real-time proof of poltergeist-like activity. The incident transformed their video from a simple urban exploration documentary into a chilling piece of paranormal evidence. A silent testament to the fact that, even in an empty room, you might not be alone. This next encounter is a stark reminder that not all threats in abandoned places are supernatural. Sometimes the danger is very real and very close. A group of 4 friends, let's call them Jake, Mike, Lisa, and Tom, were exploring a massive, abandoned factory on the outskirts of Detroit. The place was colossal, a labyrinth of rusted catwalks, silent machinery, and cavernous chambers. It had been a popular spot for explorers and graffiti artists for years, so they didn't expect to be alone. But they also didn't expect what they were about to find. They spent the better part of the afternoon on the upper floors, filming the industrial decay and the impressive scale of the architecture. As dusk began to settle, casting long, distorted shadows across the factory floor, they decided to check out the basement level. The entrance was a steep concrete staircase that descended into what looked like a black pit. The air coming up from below was cold and smelled of damp earth and something else, something foul and organic that they couldn't quite place. With their powerful flashlights cutting beams into the gloom, they cautiously made their way down the stairs. The basement was a maze of concrete pillars and dark, flooded sections. Water dripped from the ceiling, the sound echoing unnervingly in the vast space. They were moving in a tight group, their voices low and tense. The creepy atmosphere was getting to them, and the foul smell was getting stronger, making it hard to breathe without covering their mouths. They ventured deeper, their flashlight beams dancing across piles of debris and junk. It was Mike, who was filming, that suggested they stop for a moment and just listen. He thought he heard something besides the dripping water. They all went silent, standing stock still in the near-total darkness, straining their ears. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, from the darkness just beyond the reach of their lights, they heard it. It was a growl. It wasn't an animal they were familiar with, like a dog or a raccoon. This was a deep, guttural, menacing sound that vibrated through the concrete floor. It was low, rumbling, and filled with a raw aggression that instantly triggered a primal fear in all of them. On the video, you can hear Lisa let out a small, terrified gasp. Jake, trying to be brave, called out, "Hello, is someone down here?" The only response was another growl, this time louder, closer, and angrier than the first. That was all it took. There was no discussion, no hesitation. The video suddenly becomes a blur of panicked motion as all 4 of them turn and sprint back towards the staircase. You can hear their frantic footsteps splashing through the puddles and their terrified, heavy breathing. They don't look back. They scramble up the concrete stairs, bursting back out onto the main factory floor as if they were escaping from the very depths of hell itself. They didn't stop running until they were out of the factory and safely back in the fading daylight. They never found out what was making that sound. Was it a large, territorial stray dog, a squatter who didn't want to be disturbed, or was it something else entirely? They didn't care to find out. The audio recording of that deep, menacing growl from the darkness is a chilling piece of evidence that sometimes the most terrifying thing in an abandoned building is the discovery that you are not the only living thing inside. Imagine the feeling of being trapped. Now imagine being trapped inside a decaying, forgotten building with no easy way out. That's exactly what happened to a pair of paranormal investigators, David and Emma, while they were exploring the old Blackwood Manor, a Victorian mansion rumored to be haunted by its original owner, a reclusive and reportedly cruel man. The house had been abandoned for the better part of a century, and its front door was boarded up tight. They found their way in through a rear entrance, a heavy oak door that led into the kitchen. They made sure to prop the heavy door open with a large brick they found outside. It was their only way in and out, and the last thing they wanted was for it to close accidentally. They spent the next couple of hours exploring the mansion's dusty rooms, capturing some interesting EVP clips, and experiencing a few cold spots. The house had a tense, oppressive atmosphere, but nothing overtly threatening had occurred. They decided to do one last sweep of the ground floor before packing up and leaving. They were in the grand ballroom, a magnificent but decaying space with a collapsed ceiling, when they heard a sound that made their blood run cold. It was a loud, definitive slam that echoed through the entire mansion. It was the unmistakable sound of a heavy door being shut with immense force. They looked at each other, eyes wide with fear. There was only one door in the house heavy enough to make a sound like that, their exit door in the kitchen. They rushed back through the dark corridors, their flashlights bouncing off the peeling wallpaper. When they reached the kitchen, their worst fears were confirmed. The heavy oak door was shut tight. The brick they had used to prop it open had been moved several feet away, sitting innocently on the grimy floor. A chilling realization washed over them. Even if a gust of wind had been strong enough to move the door, it couldn't have possibly moved the heavy brick as well. David grabbed the old iron handle and pulled. The door didn't budge. He pulled harder, putting his whole body into it, but it was useless. It felt like it was locked from the other side. Panic started to set in. They were trapped. On the camera footage, you can hear their increasingly frantic conversation as they try to rationalize what happened. Emma points the camera at the door, showing David desperately trying to force it open, his efforts completely futile. After several minutes of panicked pulling and pushing, with their hearts pounding in their chests, a new sound was heard. It was a faint, metallic click, coming from the door itself. It sounded like an old lock being turned. They both froze, staring at the door. David, hesitantly, reached for the handle again. He gave it a slight turn and a gentle pull. This time, the door swung open effortlessly, revealing the dark yard outside. It was unlocked. They didn't wait to question their good fortune. They scrambled out of the house and didn't look back. Something in that house had slammed the door, trapping them inside. And then, for reasons they will never understand, it had let them go. The experience left them with a terrifying question. Was it a warning to stay out? Or was it a malevolent game being played by an unseen entity? A spirit that enjoyed the thrill of trapping its victims before releasing them back into the night? Our final story is perhaps the most bizarre and unsettling of them all, as it involves not just a strange event, but a case of what seems like missing time. A team of 4 experienced urban explorers were documenting the vast and abandoned Northville Psychiatric Hospital in Michigan. The team consisted of Liam, the lead and cameraman, his girlfriend Maya, and 2 friends, Chris and Ben. The hospital complex is notoriously creepy and vast, a literal city of decay. They were communicating with walkie-talkies to stay in touch if they split up. The group was exploring the main administration building, moving from room to room as a single unit. Liam was filming their progress, capturing the eerie sights of patient wards and therapy rooms frozen in time. At one point, they came to a T-junction in a long corridor. Liam and Maya went left to check out a set of offices, while Chris and Ben went right to look at what appeared to be a small chapel. They agreed to meet back at the junction in 5 minutes. Liam kept his camera rolling as he and Maya explored the offices. After about 5 minutes, Liam and Maya returned to the junction as planned. Ben was there waiting for them, but Chris was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Chris?" Liam asked, panning the camera down the empty right-hand corridor. "I don't know," Ben replied, his voice laced with confusion. "He was right behind me." We walked into the chapel, looked around for maybe a minute, and when I turned to leave, he was just gone. This was immediately alarming. The chapel was a single room with only one entrance or exit. There was nowhere for Chris to go. Thinking it was a prank, Liam tried calling for him. "Chris, not funny, man, let's go!" Only silence answered. They tried his walkie-talkie. "Chris, come in, where are you?" Static panic began to creep in. They started a systematic search, shouting his name, their voices echoing through the desolate building. They rechecked the chapel, looking under pews and behind the altar. Nothing. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The camera footage captures their growing anxiety as minutes tick by. Nearly 15 agonizing minutes passed. They were about to call the police, fearing the worst. They were all gathered back at the T-junction, frantically discussing what to do next, when suddenly, Chris casually walked out of the right-hand corridor, the one leading from the chapel. He had a bewildered look on his face. "Hey," he said calmly. "Where did you guys go? I was waiting for you." They all stared at him in stunned silence. Liam, pointing the camera at him, asked, "Chris, where have you been? We've been looking for you for 15 minutes. Chris's face contorted in confusion. "What are you talking about? He said I've been gone for like 30 seconds. I just poked my head in the chapel and came right back out. You guys were gone." He was adamant. To him, no time had passed at all. He had no memory of the 15 minutes he was missing. He just remembered turning to leave the chapel and finding his friends gone. They showed him the camera's timestamp. They showed him the footage of them frantically searching for him. He watched it, his face growing pale with disbelief and fear. He had no explanation. For a terrifying quarter of an hour, Chris had simply ceased to exist in their reality, while in his own mind, only seconds had passed. They left the hospital immediately, profoundly disturbed. What happened to Chris in that corridor? Where did he go for those 15 minutes? It's a chilling mystery that defies any logical explanation, a terrifying glitch in time captured within the decaying walls of an abandoned asylum. The stories we've shared tonight are more than just campfire tales. They are documented moments where the veil between our world and something else grew terrifyingly thin. From the silent figure in the hospital to the impossible disappearance of an explorer, these encounters serve as a chilling warning. The decay and silence of abandoned places can be alluring, drawing us in with the promise of adventure and a glimpse into a forgotten past. But these recordings prove that sometimes, the past isn't just forgotten, it's waiting, it's active, and it does not always welcome visitors. These buildings, saturated with the emotions and events of the past, hold on to energy. For the explorers in these videos, what started as a simple exploration turned into a fight for their sanity and, in some cases, their safety. The camera's unblinking eye captured what they saw, what they heard, and what they felt. It provides us with a terrifying second-hand experience, but it's one that should be taken as a serious cautionary tale. The next time you feel the pull to step over the threshold of a forgotten place, remember these stories. Remember the growl from the basement, the door that traps you, and the wheelchair that moves on its own. Think twice before you enter, because you can never be sure what has remained behind long after the living have left. The silence you hear might not be emptiness. It might just be something holding its breath, listening for your footsteps. You never know what might be waiting for you in the dark.